Welcome to another episode of Jews on Film. My name is Daniel Zana. I'm a documentary filmmaker and editor and a Jew. With me, as always, is my co-host, Harry Ottensaucer. Hey, Harry.
Hey, Daniel, what's going on? I'm Harry. I am your friendly neighborhood Jewish film podcaster. And this week, we're joined by a special guest.
We have a really special guest today. I would say at this time of the recording, she's probably the person I've known the longest, friend-wise, from on the pod. Art director at Tablet, Australian extraordinaire, Esther Werdiger. Hi, Esther.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate your being here. As we do when we start the show, we kind of want to ask folks about their background, both Jewishly and movieishly, whatever the word is. So I wanted to start out and just ask, growing up as a kid, what was your experience like with Jewish films?
I come from a very Orthodox family, but my family also loves movies. And movies were always, I think, something we could do together and then talk about and laugh about, like when there was nothing else that we had in common. My parents would go to the movies every Saturday night. I remember Sunday morning, I'd talk to my mom, be like, what was it about? Tell me about the movies. So I was I loved movies so much. And then I took a cinema studies major at university, which was so fun. And I've always just been a big movie fan. I think in my experience, I think getting to see anything Jewish on film was thrilling and super exciting. And, that would be films from Hollywood. Australian cinema is much smaller and doesn't really have much of a Jewish voice in it. Maybe in documentary there's more. Yeah, no, we always got a kick out of movies, and it was such an easy place to go to for enjoyment and pleasure and bonding. And so that's with me too now. I love, my parents come to visit. I'm like, Mom, what do you watch on the plane? Tell me about what you so we'll talk about the movie show on the plane. So yeah, no, just love movies. I don't watch as much as I used to. I haven't been to the theater. I don't go that often anymore. I mean, COVID changed things, having kids change things, leaving the city changed things. But it's something I miss a lot because, I'm one of those people who used to go to the movies alone a lot. That to me is so pleasurable.
So
have
good.
A quiet day, preferably during the daytime. I feel like going at, depending, I guess. But it's just it's so pleasurable. But I haven't done that in ages. But that's what I like to do.
I have this streak going where I think all the movies that I've seen alone by myself happen to be some of my favorite movies ever. And I'm trying to understand if it's just because the experience is so great that maybe I'm just starting off in a great place. But I happen to see some pretty good movies that hold up. So I'm not quite sure what's causing what, but I agree with you wholeheartedly there.
Movies I've seen alone, they stick out in my mind. I think you're not interested in what the person next to you thinks at all. You're allowed to completely escape. And one of the movies that come to mind that I remember seeing alone was the Safdie brothers movie, Good Time.
Mm-hmm.
It was just amazing. That was not long before COVID, I guess. And I just remember being so in it. You're just
That's a kinetic, high energy sort of movie, similar to Uncut Gems. Very
oh my God,
on the edge of your seat the whole time.
Oh my God. Amazing. I'll never forget Uncut Gems.
I wanted to hop back to your answer because you talked about the experience of growing up and asking your mom about what movies she saw, but you didn't name any particulars. Are there any notable Jewish films growing up that made an indelible impact on your...
I don't think my parents, I've never seen Fiddler on the Roof. There's a few very basic Jewish movies that I've never seen.
We're saving that one for our 100th episode.
Sure.
If you want to come back.
I will. Well, I'll have to see it first. Movies that you've seen bits and pieces of. Sure. And I remember my parents Blazing Saddles, and I'd hear about them or jokes from them, but I never actually saw them actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The first, I remember The Big Lebowski was such a big deal. And I just remember the John Goodman character. I just think that blew my parents away. And they just thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. And it's such the thing with Big Lebowski also is that it's a very good movie, but it's liked in such a broad way.
Right.
On many different levels. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a movie you can approach very superficially and enjoy. And don't fucking roll on Shabbos, whatever. But beyond that, it's actually a very good movie. But I remember just, getting to see that and what else? I've never seen 10 Commandments. I've never seen all these classic Jewish movies.
Sure.
We didn't sit down and watch them. My parents would go out and see like big action movies. That was kind of their thing.
Ah, okay.
So there wasn't really like, I remember when Schindler's List came out. That was like a big deal. There was an Australian premiere that my parents went to. My father's father was a survivor,
right?
And my mum met Ben Kingsley at the premiere, and that was like such a big story for her.
Sure.
Like I remember that, but I don't think they went out of their way to see particularly those films. They were just people who loved going to the movies and that kind of entertainment.
So you never saw like An American Tale, Fievel Mouskowitz?
Oh, that was another one that came to mind. I was like, I wonder if I should rewatch that. That we did. We watched that for sure. That's Spielberg too, isn't it? Right?
Probably. I don't know.
No, I did see that as a kid. It's so funny because now that I have young kids, I watch so many kids' movies, and they're so they're devoid of Jewishness. There isn't a big, like there's Encanto and there's Coco and there's Moana, but there's not going to be like a Jewish one anytime soon, I don't think. The truth is, I don't mind. Like I love getting to see these other stories on film. Like I really like Moana.
Fair, yeah, totally. It's great. We're all about Encanto here. They like Encanto like all the time.
I actually want to latch on to what I think you were describing in your answer. You were talking about a lot of these movies, and you said it didn't feel like you and your family sort of actively pursued the explicitly Jewish one, but you were describing that feeling of watching another movie, watching something like The Big Lebowski, and just being struck by, there's Jewishness here. We've spoken about this on the podcast in the past, but I think a lot of what we're trying to discover here, obviously we're going to the Schindler's List and those big films that have so much Jewishness.
Eventually,
but we spoke about this in the beginning, just how I think this is coming from myself, but I come from this place where I grew up thinking that there was my movie life and my Jewish life. And there was a very different thing. And I had this very Hollywood sensibility of what movies looked like. And that feeling I think you're describing of just seeing all of a sudden someone even say the word Shabbos, right, in a movie. It's just, there's something really energizing about that and really exciting. And I think still when we do these podcasts and we're watching these movies, and oftentimes it's a movie like the one we're discussing this week that you were someone else recommends to us, and you watch it and all of a sudden, a yarmulke shows up, or they start talking they have a Jewish wedding like happens in this movie. It's just, there's something particularly exhilarating about it. And it's just cool when that overlap happens. That's kind of why.
I love it. I feel like it's geeky almost the way, because it's almost, you can't really control the response you have to it, where it is very exciting. And it's funny because you see it a lot more on TV these days. I feel like with like sort of prestige television, there have been so many shows with strong Jewish characters and subplots, but there's something about movies where it's different. It is rarer in movies, and it's rarer that it's done well. I listened a couple of weeks ago to your Licorice Pizza episode because I had just seen it and I just loved it. And that was great. And because I saw that movie and I was on a cloud for for the next week.
The Shabbos dinner scene. It's like,
the Haim sisters will do that to you,
By the way, I feel like ideologically committed to calling them Chaim because I think that's how they say their name, right? That's what they call themselves. I'm like, it's the Chaim. No, that was great. I also love the trend of people having their parents play their parents.
Amazing, right?
Aziz Ansari did that in his show, and that was like my favorite thing about it. It is cute. It's cute without being like twee. It's funny. It's like voyeuristic somehow, because it's like from the real, but yeah.
It adds that air of like authenticity. I want to do a quick follow-up question and we'll get into it. This week, we're going to be discussing The Heartbreak Kid, directed by Elaine May. We're talking about the 1972 version, not the 2007 version starring Ben Stiller.
No, I do want to discuss that at some point.
We'll get to it.
Fascinating what that movie does to this movie.
I haven't seen this. I haven't seen the other one, so we'll have to get your take on it. But I wanted to ask Esther, why did you pick this movie?
This movie feels kind of like a rare moment to me. It's so 70s. It's so Jewish. It's directed by a woman. And there really aren't a lot of them from that era. Like Elaine May is very singular. She didn't direct many films. I think she was probably sort of blackballed, at some point. I mean, I think it was probably very hard for her to do what she was trying to do. I think she's such an interesting person. I think she's so funny. She's still alive. Like she's going to die soon. She's had such she's very old. Like we don't have her for much longer. Like I feel like she's a good person to celebrate, but a lot of people don't really know about her so much, I think. I also love baby Charles Grodin. Like Charles Grodin to me, older Charles Grodin does not register to me as very Jewish.
Like Beethoven dad, like Charles Grodin. Do you remember?
Yeah,
him from
like
that?
waspy, right? He's like
Yeah.
uptight waspy dad.
Right.
But he's so Jewish. Like
Yeah.
everyone in this movie, Neil Simon, who wrote the screenplay, Bruce J. Friedman, who wrote the short story that the movie is based on, which is great, by the way, and a very quick read. I also love, like, I think so much about how Mike Nichols did The Graduate and Elaine May made The Heartbreak Kid.
Right.
And to me, they're almost like brother, sister. They're like companion films.
Right. Yeah.
This is their films belong to different genres. This is satire. This is like a deeply satirical film. I love that she directed her own daughter, Jeannie Berlin, who plays Lila. I like what this, even before I ever saw the movie, I wanted to watch it because it was like, I want to see what Elaine May did. And it's such a Jewish genre film. And it also, this is all part of the satire, and we can talk about it later. But, you know, at one point in the movie, and we'll go over it, we take this sharp turn to another part of the country, to another type of people. And Jewishness is not mentioned at all. Like, to me, that's also part of the satire, which is sort of an interesting choice.
Sure.
So no, I was drawn to it. And also, you know, when you watch a fun 70s film, you also just look at it for the set and the costumes and the music, and
amazing
you
stuff.
know, it really like transports you. It's fun. So that's why I wanted to choose the movie. And I thought maybe, you know, I kind of had a look through some of the movies you guys have talked about recently. It's fun to talk about something from a little bit further back.
Back from when we were kids, right, Esther?
Back from when we were kids, we had those hoops with the sticks.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, and it's, I don't know. I just thought it would be fun. And then I sat and watched it to sort of reaffirm. I was like, yes, I think there is actually a lot to unpack here.
Well, I'm excited to get into it.
Yes.
Harry, before we get too far, two things. I wanted to plant this is a quiz for you both. Should I
be taking notes? I feel like I need to
taking notes. So what musical cue shows up 3 times throughout the movie, and what significance does it play? Don't answer now. Save it for the end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, unless you already know. But I wanted to.
I already know.
Damn it. All right. Well, maybe I'll scrap this bit. Forget it.
No, I think it's good. And I actually haven't given it that much thought beyond. Okay. So maybe you have an insight about it.
And the audience can play along at home.
Exactly.
You know, keep that in mind.
And you can mention it on Instagram or whatever. Do I know? Hey, here, one sec. Let me pass you a pen. Here you go. Harry, can you hit us with that IMDb summary while Esther's looking for her pen?
Oh, I love that. I love that. Because I was like, do I do this? I'm so glad you guys are doing the summary.
No, you know what? You are lucky that you don't have to do it, because it was a real tough one this week. There's 2 great ones, honestly. Well, okay. I'm torn. I'm going to cheat by reading one of them and then telling you why I wanted to read the other one, but I won't waste everyone's time with 2 full summaries. So
people are busy, Harry. They don't have time. People
are busy. Let's keep this short and quick. I'm going to start with the first one, and it just reads: a newlywed man on his honeymoon has second thoughts about his marriage and falls for a different woman.
That's it.
You know, that's it.
That's it.
But is that not the movie? In some ways, that's the movie.
That's the movie.
Yeah. Okay.
The other one, I'll give like an honorable mention to. I'm not going to read it because it's actually much longer and gives, I think, the details that you're craving, Daniel.
Sure.
But one thing that I did want to point out, as I've been doing in the last couple episodes, they refer to Lenny when they introduce him as New York Jewish Lenny meets tall blonde Kelly. So there's a little bit of Jewishness kind of thrown in there. And I always like pointing that out, because then it's like, you know, maybe we're not reading too far into this that he's Jewish. Like that's really part of the plot, according to, it says here, Jeremy Perkins, the user submitter that wrote it. So Jeremy's on the same page as us.
Appreciate that.
Just wanted to point that out.
Well, with that, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back to discuss Heartbreak Kid.
Welcome back to Jews on Film. This week we're discussing Elaine May's 1972 film, The Heartbreak Kid. And Daniel, you said you wanted to share a little bit more about Elaine May. Why don't you get us started there?
Yeah, thanks, Harry. I think it's helpful to kind of contextualize who Elaine May is and, you know, kind of help frame the movie a little bit. So Elaine May and Mike Nichols had a comedy group called Nichols and May. Elaine May was a founding member of the Compass Players, like a largely influential comedy group that also had like Del Close, who was sort of I would say like the godfather of modern improv. His disciples that went on to found the UCB, Upright Citizens Brigade. You know, after that came Second City. And so a lot of this film, I think I viewed it as directly tied to like improv. And I'll talk about a little bit more about like the improv aspect of it and like how that sort of informed the style of the film and sort of some of the dialogue, but just a little bit of setting the table before we get started on the meal to carry over from our last episode, Harry, of the food metaphor. But yeah, I mean, I think I love the film starts off on like a New York street and it just gets started. Like the credits are like very basic. We meet our first character, Lenny Cantrell. He's a salesman for sporting goods, and you just see him going back and forth to different businesses, meeting people, and then he's at a bar. And then almost instantly, I think within like the first 5 minutes, he meets Lila, who is played by Jeannie Berlin. Like you said, Esther, that's Elaine May's daughter. Any thoughts on just like jumping right in and getting the party started so early in the movie? I feel like within like 10 minutes, they're already getting married.
I think it is a fast courtship.
Yeah.
I think it is a fast courtship. And then I think immediately then you go on to that thing where you find out that she's waiting to have sex until they get married.
Yeah. Oh,
so
yes.
I think this actually is a fast courtship, and it's someone who is a desirous. He wants something, right? Like he's a person who wants and then he kind of gets. And also I like how he rehearses that hello in the mirror. You see him before he goes out, he's sort of like ready. He's ready.
Yeah.
I think it is quick, and I think they're young, and this is what you do, right? And
yeah, I think everything you said sets up Lenny's character so well. I mean, even the rehearsal, like that's called back to and jumping all the way to the end. But later in the movie, when he's just quoting the same sort of conversational speak that he has with everyone, and he's kind of this like fraudulent hack. We'll dissect his character, I'm sure, throughout the film. I had a lot of thoughts watching him, but it's setting up who he is, and even the speed of what you're talking about, exactly right. Like he's just. You're supposed to feel like they rushed into this, and we're going to see that's obviously a big part of his character, and that's kind of how he thinks, and it's just looking for that sort of next deal. And I think the other aspect of what's going on here is it's just great, tight filmmaking. Like this is a movie that doesn't have a lot of threads and layers, and we don't have to go into it, but in the remake that we were talking about, I mean, they have this whole different setup for the character, and it takes them a lot more time in the movie to actually get to all this. And this is it feels like an adapted short story in a way that it just has this very sort of tight satirical window that it's trying to tell. And it doesn't waste time. It doesn't waste space with anything. It's here's what you need to know. They got married, and they're moving into it very fast. They're waiting till they get married to have sex. And that's kind of, that's setting us up.
And if you read the short stories, the setup is exactly the same. I mean, it's the pacing, it suits it's spiritually very close to the Bruce J. Friedman story. And it's also that's not what the meat of the story is. That's what we're trying to get past to get to the drama.
It gives us just enough character and setup, but the drama really is only a couple of days, from the sort of honeymoon.
Yeah, but we get a sense of the class they come from. We get a sense of who they are very quickly. These are like lower middle class New York Jews who, are maybe aspirational in a certain way, but very much of their background.
I think the sex thing is very interesting, especially with Lila and Lenny. I think, I talked about this pre-pod with Harry. Yes, we do talk outside of the podcast.
I'm shocked.
He says, oh, nobody's waiting anymore. And she says, I'm waiting. And then after they get married, like she's really like focused on pleasing him and making sure that he's good. Is it exactly what you thought it would be? Is it exactly or better? Are you glad we waited? How does it feel? And he's like, stop asking me all these questions about the sex and just be in the moment. And I thought that was interesting. And then I want to just talk a little bit about the Jewish wedding that they have. Pretty, as far as if we have our Jewish wedding checklist, there was no kippas, no chuppahs, but we did get a broken glass. We got a mazel tov, and we had a hava nagila. For those people, keeping track at home.
There's an incredibly reform rabbi wearing a black gown, but no type of head covering. There was one or two yarmulkes in the crowd, maybe.
Oh yeah, okay, that's good.
Yeah, I remember a big white one. You have the old lady talking about nachas. They should have a lot of nachas. I was like, yes, that you need one of those. And also, I love those. You see that in a lot of movies, the New York City apartment wedding. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of the movie that comes to mind is Heartburn, Nora Ephron, which begins with a second marriage, I think. But it's such a similar and that's a wealthier crowd of people, but just these small apartment weddings, which actually seem very charming to me as someone who probably spent too much money on my wedding.
It was a good wedding, Esther. It was a good wedding.
Thank you. But it's such a type, you see that in movies sometimes. It's in someone's living room, on the Upper West Side. Yeah.
It feels quaint. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great establishing moment in a film that, we're saying, is not very long, is kind of very, condensed, but they set time aside, and it's not the longest sequence, but there's this rapid montage of the Jewish wedding, because that's clearly very important to the scene setting, like you're saying, Esther, in terms of the satire and, who these people are, these sort of, lower class, Jewish New Yorkers, that's clearly such a big part of it. And I think that also in some ways, sets up who their characters are. And that gives us a lot of shorthand into, I definitely think, in how, sort of Lila starts to act, and sort of when some of her tendencies kind of start to come out afterwards, you kind of have it in the context of this sort of Jewish background that they're giving, this neurotic Jewishness that they're kind of establishing. And then we'll get to this when we get to the end of the movie, but it also kind of portends some of the pivots that happen to the characters later on in the movie. But it's just cool that like this movie, effectively the first scene is this sort of huge, identifiably Jewish wedding. That is a big part of the rest of the story as it unfolds.
For sure. And I think you also see what he's willing to leave behind and what he's going to betray. And I also think through the wedding, you see that Lila's very earnest. I think she's very, very, very in love with him. And you don't get the sense that they're being pressured or anything. Well, her at least. And I'm hugely sympathetic toward Lila through the whole movie.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think she was played very kind of in an interesting way. She's not the butt of the joke, I don't think. And I'll talk more about that later for sure. But you see that it's very genuine with her. I think she adores him and is ready to just like do it,
Already, like they're in the car taking the New Jersey Turnpike down to Miami Beach, and like she's flashing her boobs to him. He's worried she's gonna show the trucker.
What are you doing? Come on, put that down.
Nobody can see.
Come on, truck drivers can see. Guys out in trucks can look down and see.
What's wrong with it, Lenny?
Come on.
We're married.
Come on.
Later on, she's playing with his chest hair. That's already annoying him. Like she eats a Milky Way, but like I feel like already he's like regretting he has buyer's remorse almost instantly.
But it's like she's on her honeymoon. She's almost doing everything that you'd expect. But he's getting cold all of a sudden, right? Also, did you notice that scene where she flashes her boobs in the car?
Yeah.
She's wearing one of her earrings.
I did notice that.
I was like, oh, like obviously they were playing and maybe,
sure,
she's putting his ear, but they never showed you when that happened. He's just suddenly like, and he has his big
must have been cut.
With his like cravat, that's like not a dress, but yeah, that's an aside. Oh, and then we have the egg salad. Scene.
Her face, and just like so schmutzy the whole movie, and just like that. Did I get it? She's like wiping it up. No, still there. And then later with the lotion,
she's so earnest. She's so earnest. Oh, the lotion.
I'm not such an egg salad guy, but I will say that one hit a little bit close to home. I was like, oh God, I hope I keep my face clean, because I was just, in his seat, and he's like, she kind of wipes it off, and he says like, she says, did I get it all? And he's like, yeah, sure. Yeah. But you kind of see it on her face.
Still there.
But just to jump into this sort of characterization that we're talking about, like, I agree with you. I think this, Lila character, she's kind of just letting her guard down, feeling very comfortable, like dropping the facade. And one thing we know about Lenny is that Lenny never drops his facade. He's all facade.
He's a salesman. So
he's a salesman. So seeing this kind of like, this realness of who she is, this comfort, the insecurities when they're having sex, the just sort of relaxed, vibe that she's giving, when they're in the car, like, it's just like you said, it's not quite subtle, but just sort of his face does a lot in terms of just you could see him working through it in his mind, like what's going on. And she keeps saying like, this is, we have 40 more years, 50 more years. And every time she says that, he can't even
Isn't it terrific? Isn't it terrific? Terrific is like the word of the movie. Oh,
yes.
And it's so interesting because the characterization, and the way that they place these two characters, and I'll get into it a little bit now, because I just think that Lenny, hated is a strong word, but I increasingly disliked him. He's like the worst. And the way he treats her. Yeah. And it's just, I'll make the point now, I don't know if we'll get back to this, but just the newer sort of Heartbreak Kid, just because this is kind of the scene where they really depart, the Lila character in the remake, in the Ben Stiller remake, is like actually insane, like is the butt of the joke, is like certifiably like really ridiculous and crazy and like off-putting and offensive, and like it's almost the movie, and then it places sort of Ben Stiller as this very sympathetic, like, what did he get into? He didn't even want this. Like, we feel bad for him. And it's a total sort of like gender realignment, and it takes away all of the satire, and it turns it into this like, how much would it suck if you were a guy and you got screwed into this, crazy woman, and wouldn't you wish that you could just fall in love with someone else? And it's just, it's so upsetting in the context of just what this first movie's trying to achieve, and the way that it's kind of casting Lenny as this like you called him a schmuck. He really is this sort of like performative salesman who like very clearly wants something out of Lila, and it's probably just sex with her and whatever communal cultural stability that comes with it, but sheds all that kind of very quickly. And it's a totally different characterization that we see in these first couple of scenes.
I read the Bruce J. Friedman story, which actually was published, I think, the year that The Graduate came out, 1966, which is a couple of years before the movie. It was published in, I think, Esquire, and I found online like the original magazine spread. It has like a great illustration, and it has a little dedication that he's written, Bruce J. Friedman, at the very top, that says, "This story is dedicated," I'm paraphrasing. He's like, "to any man who has ever thought for like even a split second that his wife isn't the most wonderful person in the world," which I just thought was great. And a reminder also that like, this is satire. Like, you are allowed to have these thoughts of, these moments do happen. Like, what if you actually did something about it? You know what I mean?
Right.
If you do start dating someone and you go on your first trip, or you decide to travel with a good friend of yours, there's always the day that you hate each other. There's always a day that you grade on each other. Mm-hmm. It's a process that you really have to get through. You have to see this thing through. And it's almost like from the first second, he's unwilling to see it through or give it a shot. Like, it becomes apparent so quickly that he doesn't know what to do beyond feeling totally trapped in this situation.
Oh, totally. And so like you alluded to, just to kind of move the plot along. So Lila and Lenny are now in Miami. They're on their honeymoon. And almost immediately, the aggravation from Lenny's part on whatever Lila is doing seems to just build and build and build. They go out to the beach together. And that is when we are first introduced to Kelly. I wanted to talk about the camera work. And in general, I just feel like it's very like handheld and like really nice. But Kelly, played by Cybill Shepherd, comes in and she flirts with him almost immediately. Her appearance, like our Lenny character is sitting on the floor enjoying the beach while his wife, I believe, is...
She's teasing her.
Yeah.
I was laughing because that killed me when she was just like, just 2 seconds, just 2 more seconds, just 2 more seconds. And she's just like teasing her hair because she's trying to like make it nice and big. And then she's just like, I'll see you down there in 10 minutes.
It was just
can't get out of the room.
Just like so nebbish. I don't know. It was just like not.
I love her. I mean, she never gets any kind of assurance from him. She never gets any kind of compliment from him, encouragement. No. Really, she's abandoned immediately.
Yeah. And he's down at the beach. He's hitting on Kelly. She flirts with him. She's like totally backlit. We just see like her blonde hair, straight hair. She's wearing this like really nice swimsuit. They're flirtatious a little bit.
It's interesting, the swimsuit differences. It's a very plain. I mean, she's beautiful, so she's gorgeous.
It's like a blue one piece.
No, the first one is black. The first plain black one, and then the second day is blue. And then Lila has like she has like her honeymoon outfit. But also, what do you make of those shots of the sun? Do you know there's a couple of shots
those like very dizzy kind of.
We don't always get into the sort of shot for shot breakdown of these movies. We could read some Jewishness into it. I'm sure we can come up with a stretch there. But I did write down when I was watching this that shot of her face kind of blocking the sun. I said it was spectacular because there's this moment. It's right. It's when Kelly's character, like you were describing, Daniel, is standing over Lenny and she's kind of like, Lenny's looking up.
Yeah.
And Lenny's like looking up and the sun is kind of glaring in his eyes. And then all of a sudden her face kind of appears in front of the sun and she gets this gorgeous backlighting, but she's kind of blocking the sun. So she's like in his frame. Yeah. And as he's like talking to her, she's kind of shifting a little bit and the sun keeps flashing in his eyes. And it's like he's looking at a mirage and he's just trying to like make her out like when he can see her in the sun.
Right.
And it was just like spectacular filmmaking. I really just appreciated that scene. And it definitely casts her as this sort of perfect blonde in contrast to, the Jewish woman with the big curly hair that was kind of, struggling and, antsing her way up in the apartment. And that sort of contrast is immediately set up. We're supposed to know, that Kelly is a threat. All of a sudden, this guy he's been kind of wavering in terms of his faith to his wife. All of a sudden, he comes across this, beautiful blonde woman kind of masked in the sun.
Object of desire. Yeah, she's like a goddess or something.
Very clearly. Yep.
Yes, and she's such a flirt. I mean, just that. What's the first line when she says, "You're in my spot"? Like, it's a great line, really.
Oh yeah,
it's very funny actually. But she just goes right in there.
And he's sitting around. He looks around on the beach, and it's just all sand around him. There's literally nothing near him.
But it's just interesting contrasting the two in terms of like the swimsuit, the hair, and then just like the sexual adventureness. I wouldn't call whatever. Let's just say like Kelly is so sexually aggressive, and like she's taking a very like traditionally masculine role of being the aggressor, of being like she's found prey and she's hitting on him, and she's being very flirtatious. Whereas Lila's a bit more sexually inexperienced, a little bit more, what do you think? Is this okay? Does this feel good? I think just contrasting the two, I think is like, it's sort of night and day for me. At least that was my read of it. That's my male read of it. But, I just thought like her being so much more, she was the one who like flirted with him initially. She saw him at the bar again later on. And she's with the opening lines and the flirtatious stuff. And he says, of course, a girl like you is named Kelly Corcoran. I thought that was a pretty funny line. And then, his wife does eventually come down. They spend some time at the beach, and he's trying to make sure that Lila puts on sunscreen, which sort of is an important plot point because later on, when she comes back, she's completely sunburned. And I think at this point, Lenny has hatched a plan to keep his wife, Lila, under more or less house arrest while she applies creams for the rest of the week. And so he goes out and he flirts with Kelly.
I mean, that scene just adds on to the sort of Lenny is the worst person kind of trait, because he makes it all her fault and is just awful to Lila, and then he just says oh, you're gonna have to be stuck in the room all day, like I guess I'm just gonna go down to the beach alone, and it's just like, and she's like, well, what will I do? And he's like, well, you don't have a choice, you have to stay in here. She's like, we could just sit in the shade. He's like, you can't sit in the shade, there are rays in the shade, like I have to go. And it's like, you're on your honeymoon, you don't have to go to the beach, you can sit with your wife here, even if for some reason she's not allowed to leave, which obviously she can, but if you're gonna trap her, like you could also stay with her. It's just it's whatever, it's manipulative, it's toxic, it's all the terrible traits. But
I love gaslighting.
I was just gonna say that word.
Absolutely.
The G word came out. There we go.
No, definitely. I mean, no, he abandons her immediately, and the string of lies that he comes up with, like immediately, just to kind of cover the tracks. I mean, it's like he's just on to the next thing already. It's very cruel. And she's very trusting. I don't think, she doesn't suspect anything at the beginning. I don't think.
Why would she? I mean, they just got married, she has no reason. Yeah, days ago. I mean, I was sort of alluding to it earlier, this sort of improv background. I think, he wants to go downstairs and get a bottle of beer, and then he totally makes up this whole notion of finding an old army buddy that he runs into. They meet up, he just is able to just come up with all this stuff off the cuff, very quickly.
Salesman.
No hesitation whatsoever.
I'll say two things about that. One, what I loved about that lie, he has this whole lie about meeting his former army, a fellow soldier who saved his life and whatever. And we learn later on in the movie that when he's talking to Kelly's father, he says something about, going to the army. And he said, going to the army was tough. I mean, fortunately, I didn't have to go overseas because of a minor back injury, which I'm sure is something he lied about. And it's just like, this guy is such a crook. But the other thing that I'll mention there is that I want to pull up the line because I wrote it down, but I was just reading about, what you're saying, this sort of improvisational style. And, this was famously, a lot of the dialogue was written by Neil Simon. And I read here that Neil Simon had a contract that stated that none of his dialogue could be changed without his permission. And Elaine May, as a filmmaker, is very improvisational and loves going with the improv style. And basically, they said that they would film two versions. One was with the original script, one where it was more free flow. And the story goes that after 2 weeks on set or a week on set, Neil Simon kind of left and was like, great, shoot your version kind of thing. And that's kind of what went with it. But there's something, that Elaine May style is definitely infecting, his character. And I didn't read the short story, Esther, so you could tell me if that's, sort of in the short story already. But this sort of free flowing, quick on his feet, lying, just keeps filling, the empty space with words to kind of get his way in every situation is definitely part of his character, and I would say comes from that Elaine May style of comedy.
He's such a he's so full of shit, but he's so unlikable. I think he is a classic schmuck. I think that's what he is.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And then, you guys, I guess keep the plot going, but just then you have this other woman who's such an interesting character too, because she does initiate in many ways, but then she does this step back thing, right? That she won't do anything that if her father says, then she won't do it, or that. And then I'm sort of rushing, but later on when she was like, you have to make your own decisions, things like that. But she's prey. She's such a I guess it's not. Is that waspy? It's Minnesota, so she's more. She's very strong. She's strong and she's smart and she's untouched. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I think she's also sort of quite.
Oh yeah.
She's virginal in a way too.
They play this sort of chastity game later on, where they're taking off all their clothes and try not to touch stuff. But there's. I just want to top off. Put a little sprinkle on top for how much of a scumbag this guy is. Not only does he lie to his wife about army buddies and things like that, he then the next night or he promises Lila that he's going to go out to dinner with her. He cancels because he's meeting Kelly's parents and, who don't like him at all. I think Kelly says something like,
the mother's
really
fine. The dad who
becomes
the adversary.
He seems to fall for his games.
he hasn't met you, but from appearances, he doesn't like you.
He doesn't like you, right? The dad
Right.
now becomes the next thing to overcome.
Yeah. And, he lies about a car accident and things like that. And I think, the dad is totally, I think, like you said, Esther, like Kelly is like caught her prey, more or less. She's got him on the hook, and now she's just going to kind of back off and play it cool. And then he has to kind of like run and pursue her. And he's like,
but we sort of never know what she wants. Like it's actually unclear what she wants.
She's a bit tepid.
It's really him. It's his desire that creates this momentum, and there's constant momentum in the movie. Like immediately, it's like he says it right out. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I got to end my marriage, and I'm going to come to Minnesota, and
it's
I'm
very
going to get your daughter.
It's very quick.
Here's the deal. The marriage is off. It was just one of those dumb things I rushed into, like joining the army, except this time I'm not going to wait around 3 years to get out.
It's like so quickly, he's really willing to turn on Lila and go for Kelly. And he's decided to he's going to leave Lila and he's going to pursue Kelly.
And I think what we learn about Kelly later on is that for her, this is definitely a game of a sort of attraction. I mean, we spoke about it in the beginning that she was, flirting with him. Clearly, she instigated. She said, "You're in my spot." There was nothing there. And then when he actually comes to her and says, "I made a mistake. I'm leaving my wife. I'm going to pursue you." She says, "Well, we're going back to Minnesota tomorrow, or today." This was kind of just like a fling. And then even when later on in the movie he comes to find her, she's like, "Oh, that was so long ago." She really thought of that as a fling. Right. And exactly. And I think and jumping ahead, we'll work our way here, but when they actually have their sort of first night together, when they play that game of attraction, I mean, she talks about how she's like, here's the game. It's we both take off our clothes and get naked and kind of approach each other, but we can never touch. And it kind of represents where she is. She loves the sort of the chase, the tease, and that kind of getting close to him, but she's not looking for the same ends that he is. And we know from, the beginning of the movie, that's obviously not where Lenny is. Lenny is the one who wants to have sex a week before the wedding and can't wait. And is just like, I want to have sex with you. And kind of once Lenny gets past that point, it doesn't seem like he has much more in him or much more interest in him with, whoever his sort of, prey, so to speak, is because, he kind of moved on from his wife very quickly. And you kind of get the sense that his relationship with Kelly might not last very long either.
There is, I feel, this unsaid thing. And again, I think this is part of the sort of the satirical face of the movie, that he's an amoral New York Jew who's coming after this waspy girl. I don't know. Could you call her a wasp again? I don't think it's the right word for her. I don't know. She's a shiksa. Well, she's like a perfect shiksa.
I was going to go with non-Jew this episode, but if you want to go shiksa, go for it.
I think she's an idealized shiksa. I think from the perspective of the Jewish writers and filmmakers and actors. I think, they're creating a perspective of maybe other people who might see this totally morally bankrupt, Jewish man who's clawing at the door to be with the daughter. But again, the Jewishness is not named. This idea, maybe that's me projecting. It's like a Jewish insecurity that this is how they see us. This is the desirous, horny, amoral, schmuck who's now going to come to the Midwest to get our daughters.
Defile our daughters or whatever. Totally.
Yeah. He's like a corrupting force or something. I mean, it's hilarious to me that he gets her. The fact that they get married and have this church wedding. It's the whole thing is just shit. Sorry.
That's okay.
I think what's so interesting is that I noticed kind of going the other way almost. She is an idea of sort of, of this sort of non-Jew, to him, because I think we see as the movie goes on and when he kind of meets her family, he talks about just wanting his big, saying that he keeps repeating is he wants to just give back to the land and we shouldn't take so much. And he wants to live farm. It's his idea of this non-Jew culture.
The dream is to be a farmer and give back.
I think it's just what he thinks he's supposed to say because that's what he thinks of as he is. I think this whole movie, and this is a thread I wanted to talk about throughout, and we'll get to this, especially with the wedding scene you alluded to at the end, but it's a lot of him running away and sort of escaping his marriage and how he sees Lila as this sort of, as we're reading, and I think is pretty much there, this sort of typical Jewish neurotic caricature almost. He is looking for the exact opposite. So instead of the city girl, he's looking for the country girl, and he's looking for this, woman of the land with his, white picket fence, nice family. And he's trying so hard to kind of chase this dream to the point that I think he doesn't actually see her. He sees her the way that I think the movie sometimes casts her, as this sort of perfect virginal woman that we were describing that was worshipped in the sun. And she's she's just this idea to him, she is like perfect. Like there's that scene later when he like sees her naked, as I was talking about, and he says, and this is another one of the sort of Jewish things I noted in the film, but he looks up and he says,
"Thank you, God. I've just seen your masterpiece and I thank you for it."
I mean, in the most literal sense of the word, she is objectified by him. And I think she represents the sort of antithesis to the sort of Jewish lifestyle and marriage that he finds himself in the first half of the movie.
Right.
That scene where then he goes and he has dinner at her parents' house and has his bullshit spiel about like how the food is honest.
I mean, this is honest food. There's no lying in that beef. There's no insincerity in those potatoes. There's no deceit in the cauliflower. This is a totally honest meal.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I mean, he's just full of shit. I mean, I like that the dad calls calls him out from the very beginning. And again, hilarious to me that he manages to like. Sorry, I'm skipping ahead too much.
You are. I was gonna catch us up there. They're not even divorced yet. Hang on. Pump the brakes a little bit.
Yes, I have to get divorced first.
Yeah, let's get them divorced. So Lenny and Kelly are at this point hanging out almost exclusively. Lila's basically, like I said, on house arrest, nursing her sunburns. She's watching Emma on TV. So shout out to Clueless, a previous episode adaptation of Clueless. Anyway, all of our episodes are interconnected in the Jews on Film universe, and somehow
I did not pick up on that.
Oh yeah, I think they mentioned something about Emma, and so I'm assuming it's Jane Austen's Emma, which is an adaptation. Clueless is an adaptation of Emma. So yes. I think the lies increase. Lenny goes on a cruise, much to Kelly's dad's chagrin. He like jumps on last minute. He goes on this cruise. Funny. He's like completely sunburned when he comes home. He lies again about a car accident and
the court. He had to go to the court case. He's on the courtroom steps.
It's just they
have court very early in Florida because it gets hot.
I mean, the way that he just like thinks of this, that's like impressive, but also very scummy. And I think at some point, he lays the cards on the table to Papa Corcoran, and he tells him, I want to be married to your daughter. I'm currently on my honeymoon right now. It's a bit of an awkward situation.
I don't like one goddamn thing about you.
Initial judgments very often are misleading. See, I found that out to my sorrow, sir.
You come hanging around my daughter on your honeymoon? Hang around your wife. Don't hang around my daughter.
But eventually, Lenny decides...
It's so funny. Funny.
Lenny's going to take Lila out to pecan pie and shellfish like he promised her. And he's finally going to set her free. He's going to rest his conscience a little bit by ordering this food. And then just kind of like freeing himself of Lila before he pursues Kelly. I just want to point out they are eating shellfish in the movie, and then they have pecan pie with whipped cream. But he seems like so happy after he has this discussion, and Lila is like nauseous. She wants to barf.
It's like I like you better now.
I want a quarter to go to the bathroom. He just like pushes her down. I want a quarter.
Yeah, I thought she was going to vomit. I thought there was going to be puking or something like that.
I was waiting for that. I read somewhere that, that scene where he's kind of like not letting her go to the bathroom, which is just, another tally in his list of terrible things. But, his energy, like you're saying, is so giddy and like relieved. And I read somewhere that it was almost like he wanted her to be excited for him. Like, look, I actually found my next pursuit. Like, you should be happy.
And then she should be excited too, because now...
he's like, you're 22, you have your whole life. Like, exactly. Like, just enjoy. And it's just, there's a very clear disconnect. And my only disappointment with the film was that there's no redemption arc for Lila. Like, I wanted us to see her again. But at that point, she's out of the movie. She's
totally disposed of. I also want to talk about, I don't know if she's wearing an amazing outfit in that scene. She hasn't been up to go out at night since they got there. And now she's all dressed up.
Yeah.
And, she has her hair all done, but she's wearing an almost like 70s, like Pocahontas. There's like with the beading, it's almost like a Native American. And it's funny. I mean, you have like Kelly, who's supposed to be this like perfect salt of the earth, like true American. And then you have, Lila, who is like, she's like a New York Jewish girl in these like outfits. It's just like too much. It's like overboard, this sort of trying to access the sort of Americana, but clearly it's like camp, But no, it's such a great outfit, and it's such an awful scene. He's totally giddy. He's so excited. He's like done. He's like he's trying to like let her down easy, but it's not possible.
No. He's so excited. Sad. He says, "The best night of our life. Aren't you happy about tonight?"
You got the car.
Yeah. So yes, exactly. Right. So thank you. So Lenny essentially meets up with a friend who he then promises Lila like all of his material possessions.
I think it's a family member. I think it's a family member who was gone back to see to. I mean, I guess annul, right? They couldn't. It's an annulment.
And I mean, he wants to get on the next bus like right away. Like he's ready. He leaves everything to Lila. And this is the second time our musical cue is playing. It first appears at the first wedding. It then plays at this point, and it also plays at the last wedding.
I'm thinking of a different musical cue. I'm thinking of "Close to You," the Carpenter song that they dance to, and then she sings in the car.
This is the part where I answered the quiz from the beginning for those who are paying attention home. The song, "Why Do Birds Suddenly Appear?" So at the beginning, they're playing it on the piano.
Yeah.
At the wedding. They're playing it. They have like a string version of it during the bus scene, I believe. And then at the end, I believe they're also either singing it or playing it on the piano. So it's just kind of like a nice...
We are thinking of the same songs. It actually comes up a couple times because Close to You.
Is that what it's called?
Yes, a Carpenter song.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
And they sing it also on the road trip when they're driving down to Miami. You remember she's singing and he says like, you have a really lousy voice.
Oh, he's such a scumbag. Ugh. Jeez. It's called "Close to You." Okay.
I think so.
Hold on.
I don't know if the Carpenters wrote the song, but it was like a big hit for them.
Yeah. Okay. So this is okay. You're right. It's called "Close to You." But anyway,
that definitely
that's the song, and that's like that's our musical. Yeah. And so now they're divorced, and he's on his Greyhound bus, heading to Minnesota to meet up with Kelly. I guess she exchanged information with him because then he shows up in Minnesota on this college campus where he goes from a very warm, comfortable Florida to a very cold Minnesota where he's very ill prepared. And he already like symbolically, he's out of place. He's like uncomfortable there, like physically uncomfortable. I mean,
he's Jewish. You see already the people they cast for that scene, like the boys that
Nordic
she's walking
boys.
with. Oh. Yes, just immediately. It's just, you're in like a totally different place. And at some point they say that it's like 2 below Fahrenheit, something like that. But it's which is unimaginably cold for me.
We hear like 4 or 5 weather reports in a row where it's like he's listening like to some radio, and then you hear another one, and someone's like, "It's going to be 2 degrees below today," and then someone's like, "It's actually going to be as bad as 15 below today." And it just keeps getting worse and worse. It was ridiculous.
A quick thing about that weatherman, that's not a Minnesota accent. That was like a very, very, very thick New York accent. And I was like, unless this was like a New Yorker who moved to Minnesota, Elaine May probably cast one of her friends as the weatherman. I looked it up. There was nobody in the credits, but I thought it was like a funny, I don't know. I found it enjoyable, but yeah,
you don't actually really hear like any Minnesota accents. Like none of the characters have any kind of regional accent.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like I also, Lenny is not, he kind of has like doesn't have much of a New York accent either, right?
Well, he's from Pittsburgh, Charles Grodin.
Right. That would explain it. But so Kelly, he meets up with Kelly. Lenny meets up with Kelly. She's a college student. She's 21 years old. I think about to turn 21. Very young kid. I don't know how old Lenny is. I would wager a little bit older if I had to guess, because he served time in the army and he's a working professional. But she's on her college campus, hanging out with her friends. It's unclear if she's like romantically involved with one of these Norse gods, but immediately Lenny tries to butt in and he's waiting for her. And then he pulls out another improv thing and he pretends that he's from the Department of Justice and is trying to smell this guy's cigarette to see if it's weed or anything like that. But I thought that was like a very clever way to get all the people away so that he can then talk to her and
kind of impress her. She's sort of like impressed by the strategy, I think, of it.
Yeah. And he's become the sort of the aggressor or the pursuer,
It's not just that he's become the pursuer. I think we have this incredible scene where they kind of move into his car afterwards. He brings Kelly with him.
Yep.
And it really, really mirrors the earlier scene in the car where it's not just that he's become the sort of pursuer to Kelly, but he's really assumed this Lila position of being all of a sudden like head over heels, very strange. And she's like, Kelly's resisting the same way he did. Like, we'll see. And I don't remember if it's here or a later scene where he literally says the same thing, like, we'll get married for 40 to 50 years. Literally parroting Lila's words.
I didn't pick that up. That's great.
And I'm just, I'm trying to understand, where his character has gone. If it's that, all along he was just sort of fetishizing this idea of, the Kelly, the leaving Jewishness. And this is just, he's found it. And we're finally seeing what he would have shown to Lila if she, represented that same departure. Or the other reading I had is that maybe this is just who Lila knew him as. They kind of have this refrain in the beginning, him and Lila, when they're leaving on their honeymoon, where they're just like, he keeps learning all these things. Like, I didn't know that about you. She's like, I guess you didn't know that about me. And she says, like, why are you being quiet the whole time? And Lenny the entire time is like, I'm always quiet in the morning. And then later says, why are you being quiet? He said, I'm always quiet at night. And you get the sense that his personality must have flipped because, we see in that early scene, like he was really pursuing Lila when he was trying to sleep with her. And I'm sure it was physical and objectifying and, not from a place of love, but I'm sure he put on a very similar, routine that he's doing to Kelly right now. So I wasn't sure what to get a read on this Lenny, if he's just playing his same old games again and he's just doing the infatuation stage that's going to kind of die down probably soon after he gets bored and he gets married and then gets bored.
It does,
or if this really was or if this really was this just like he's found it, in that scene I referenced later, he says, thank you, God, I'm seeing your masterpiece. It's like, this is all he's wanted, this perfect. I mean,
there is such an allure of the other. Like, I think that, Lila obviously comes from where he comes from. And, I think she does, I don't think she's a flawed character so much as the fact that she provokes him in that way. She irritates him. It's like he just doesn't want it anymore. I think he does want to go further, to be with a different kind of person. Like, I think there is like much more appeal. It's fascinating. I mean, just from an anthropological point of view, you just see he's in a totally different world. He's like left his New York bubble.
Right. Yeah. And so after he, pursues Kelly in the car, they start to make out in the car. And then it's shortly after where they sort of play this game that we've talked about a few times. And then Lenny wears down the father's defenses and he gets to have a nice meal at the family dinner table. Dad is still pretty silent and still pretty pissed that he's having this Jew sit at his table. But thoughts on this scene? I think, the mom, like you said, Esther, before, the mom tolerates Lenny and he's, pretty charming to her. But the dad sees
I think
through.
She's totally charmed. I think the mother is totally charmed by him.
Kelly's just kind of like, I don't know. She doesn't seem smitten by him.
I think Kelly is amused watching this whole thing because clearly she's seen like this before. She knows her dad.
Sure.
I think she's sort of amused, and it's almost like she doesn't have a dog in the race, right?
She's like
that invested.
She's on board for whatever happens,
She'll get told. She can it's her fun. She'll be told what to do almost,
Yeah.
I was going to say, well, we know that she is, she's really like a sort of Daddy's father's girl. Daughter, right? Daddy's girl. Exactly. And
she's a father's daughter.
Father's daughter.
That's how I was thinking of it. But
very, very formal, Harry.
That was the read I got. But she's definitely, going to do what he says. And she's kind of watching. Yeah, she's watching him as he's listening, and he says that. And I think that, you mentioned that, he's sitting there thinking of this Jew at his table. I didn't read that as like overt anti-Semitism. Obviously that plays into his, giving the money and the way that he thinks about it. Although he does say, I'm a rich man. I deal with my problems with money. He is that sort of, quote unquote, like, waspy, stereotype that, I know it's not exactly waspy, but I think his read is just he's like he sees the same thing that I think we saw watching the movie, that Lenny is this lying schmuck, and he's just sitting at the table like I'm going to let him entertain my family, talk about the honest cauliflower and how this is all honest work and like part of the land of the earth, and he's like, I'm just going to sit back and watch it. And then he says, when he confronts him, he said, you learn a lot more about a person by listening and letting them speak than actually by talking to them. And
he gets very excited about that. Lenny is like, all right. And
one thing we know about Lenny is that Lenny literally, I don't think we ever saw him really listen to anyone. We haven't seen him go a scene without, just yapping his mouth off and just talking and just trying to fill the space. And they're coming from total opposite places, which, like you're saying, it comes with some excitement because I think that's what's drawing Lenny to the situation. He wants to kind of be transgressive of his background and wants to go down this new path, but it's so stark how just opposite these two men are, which is why they, even when, Lenny refuses the money, it's not like this moment of, okay, you passed the test, you really love my daughter, you can get married to her. It's the same reluctant, I did all that I could, this guy wouldn't take my money, so I guess I don't have a choice anymore. They're getting married.
Right. I mean, Kelly's dad, just to touch on what you were saying, Lenny gets very excited about Kelly's dad saying, "Oh, I can tell a lot about a man," but what you said was it was a total crock of shit. Like,
right.
I don't believe a word of what you said. What the hell does that mean, an honest meal? And like you said, Esther, that is when he starts to try to bribe him. And, $5,000, $10,000, $25,000. And like you said, he doesn't take the bait. So ultimately, I think the deal is sealed. The wedding is planned. And just as the first wedding happened sort of rather abruptly and quickly, I think the next scene is the wedding. Is that right?
I think so. I think so.
And it happens just as quickly. The Carpenter song is played yet again. And that's interesting, comparing and contrasting the weddings. One took place in a very small apartment. The other one is like this big austere church and things like that. And,
right. And it's this big Christian wedding with huge crosses. And it's not even like a secular wedding. It's like a very Christian, like he has, and this is a parallel, right? We open the movie with that sort of big iconically Jewish wedding to this one that's very identifiably Christian. Right. And it just represents the thing that we've been saying this whole time, this sort of total cultural flip. Like, Lenny's apparently found what he wanted. It was never to be part of, he's fully managed to escape, where he came from and has entered into the fold. He's married into this just whole different lifestyle. He doesn't care.
It's like he doesn't have values. I think the value is getting the thing that you think you want in that moment.
Right.
I do think also reading, because the film is absurd. I think reading back to it as like satire, also this idea of I think the history of Jews in America is so fascinating. It's different to where I'm from in Australia. And obviously, it's a generation where so many men from very Jewish families marry non-Jewish women, right? Mm-hmm. And it's almost like it's a satirical telling of like an intermarriage. That how does someone like that marry someone like this? Like, it's absurd as it sounds. Like it's you can laugh at it because it's funny, I think, to the Jewish people that like you are like you're so us, like we come from this world, but like you're marrying this, like how does that happen?
Almost. Yeah.
It's like that threat, you sort of you leave the New York Jewish shtetl, you go on this vacation to sort of the exotic, Miami, and all of a sudden it's just, the first eyes that this man that this Jewish guy lays his eyes on, it's all of a sudden like, she's literally the first woman that he meets, on the beach that he even talks to. And it's just, that's what happens. If you're spending too much time on your hair, you can't join him at the beach. Like that's what happens. Your man gets just snatched up.
Exactly.
And it's clear that Miami is the furthest they've ever been from New York, right? This is a big trip for them, but like he has to go further. He has to go to Minnesota. We have to talk about the final scene. It's amazing. Yes,
I was just going to say, I think, thank you, Esther. I was just about to raise my little finger and say, let's talk about the last scene, but you did it. I appreciate that. Yeah. So, the last scene of the movie is the wedding reception. Everyone's schmoozing. Lenny is peddling his bullshit to any guest who will listen. Like you said, Harry, before, he talks about not only taking from the land, but giving back to the land, and just kind of like
it's funny because you think about fertilizer, right? You think that he's so full of shit, but you think about what you put in the soil. That's he was talking to actual farmers. He's in Minnesota. He's talking to farmers. Like, I think it reads as bullshit, but people being very polite to him.
But I just like that the way that the editing of this scene worked was like he's talking to guest A, and then we cut to some other B-roll shot, and then we cut back to him, and he's having the same speech, but with like a different person. And it just keeps going. You see the
dad kind of watching, right? The dad is like, eyeing him throughout. You don't know where the wife is. He's sort of like...
She's off, and she comes over almost to like, hold on, I'm talking to somebody. He does it already. He pushes her away. Like, it's the thrill of the chase for this scumbag. And, the film closes out with him sort of talking with just like two little children, him doing his same stuff, and then just like asking them about their life. But then he takes this really like long sort of finally takes a deep breath because he's got what he wants, and he's just sitting there finally, like all of his decisions for the past 5 days are finally just like sinking in. And I feel like that's when he has this sort of enlightened moment, or this just epiphany is the word I was looking for. And then the film ends. So thoughts on the last scene?
He's sort of singing to himself. I actually think he's aloof. I don't think much is dawning on him at all. I think it's funny to, contrast it with like that final shot of The Graduate, right? Where you do see all of those decisions kind of dawning. I think this is not that. I think this is him kind of, this is the end. This is the end of the road for him, where like,
interesting. Okay.
He has nothing to say to these people, it's a slightly different ending in the short story.
Okay.
And because it is a short story, I think the satire is more forthcoming.
Yeah.
The very end of the story is at the wedding reception, and he talks to the dad, and then at some point he's replaced with Kelly's mother and is talking to the mother, and the final line of the story is he seems to be hitting on the mother. The mother is now the object of desire. It's in one line.
Yeah.
It's one line.
Yeah.
And I had to almost it was a double take. I was like, oh, and it's funny. But it's basically like the last thing he says to her was like, just, don't say anything till I finish talking, like, hear me out. Like, that's like the final line of that story, which is such an amazing line. It's like, she doesn't have to say anything. He doesn't say anything explicit. It's just like there, like, don't say a word until I finish. Just like, it's so perfect. And I think that ending, doing that in the movie would have been too weird. Like it sort of becomes again, sort of psychosexual, or like it's a little too perverted maybe.
Sure.
Like he's already done enough in the movie. Like he doesn't have to then, turn to the mother. But you see, right, he's just, I don't know. It's like in that moment, he maybe has no needs. I think he's just an idiot.
Yeah, just the you were talking about him sort of singing to himself at the end, and he's singing the song, "I'd Like to Buy the World a Coke," which is what I thought you were talking about, Daniel, in terms of the recurring musical theme, because that's obviously the song
they
that they were singing.
Also earlier in the
car
with
Lila, that he calls
out
Lila for having a terrible voice and tries to pitch correct her, and all of a sudden he's humming it to himself, and I'm not sure what the reading is, if he's all of a sudden remembering what he gave up and remembering Lila, or if he's just like, one of the reads that I had was that it's just this, he has this idyllic vision of the future, that's from that famous Coke commercial that just come out where
Don
everyone
Draper.
is sort of, exactly, the Don Draper one, where everyone is sort of standing on this island and just singing about harmony and life. And it's just, I think that's just what he wanted. He wanted that sort of, nice blonde woman. He's happy. He's in his happy place. And I think he's just casually singing his song, and, it's not being interrupted by, what to him, his sort of nagging wife. It's now just like he can sing in peace. Like even at the reception, he doesn't spend any time with Kelly, right? Kelly keeps looking for him, and she's like, I've been looking for you. And he's like, hold on 1 minute, with these people right now. And it's just, he's the kind of guy who's the happiest with himself. He sees these women in his life as objects, and he, takes them for what he needs. But other than that, he is just in his own world. He enjoys putting up this facade. And I think he's just very self-satisfied. That's kind of how I read that, singing that song again at the end.
Totally. I mean, not too dissimilar from us being by ourselves at the movie. With that, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be right back with our reviews and ratings of the film, The Heartbreak Kid. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Jews on Film. We're going to be discussing our ratings and review the film, The Heartbreak Kid. We're here with Esther Werdiger. During the break, you mentioned something about the title. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
I don't really know what to make of the title. It's compelling to me, like The Heartbreak Kid. The original short story is called A Change of Plan, which really sums everything up.
Yeah.
In a way that's very funny to me. But, for a movie, I guess you would want a different kind of title. And it's definitely a snappier title. It almost promises something else, I think, because he's not he really does break a heart. The Heartbreak Kid. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know. But
they're both kids. They're both breaking hearts. I mean, I think to some extent, obviously Lenny's breaking Lila's heart.
Is she the heartbreak? Is she right?
But Kelly is just like, whatever. I'll marry you, I guess. But at the beginning, she doesn't really she breaks his heart a little bit. So I don't know. It's a good question. Harry, any thoughts?
Yeah, I actually did some research into this a little bit. I mean, I don't mean to set anything up, because the punchline is I didn't learn so much new. I said, what is a heartbreak kid? And most things kind of chased it back to this movie. And it's just, I saw one thing that said someone whose heart has been broken, and then they go on to break other people's hearts. It's sort of this endless cycle of heartbreak. And, there's something you could read that's sort of, what they're kind of stuck in. But I have the sense that it creates this sort of continuity that this isn't the end of the story for Lenny, and it's he, broke someone's heart, and he's going to break someone else's heart. And he's the kind of guy that, like we just said, he loves himself more than anyone else. He's not really going to find, happy marriage, I don't think, is in his future. He is just going to continue breaking hearts. That was kind of how I read it. I read the title.
We often talk about unmade sequels here. So in Heartbreak Kid 2, Lenny's Revenge, in 5 days' time, when we pick up the movie, is he still with Kelly?
Revenge.
Lila's actually. Lenny doesn't need any revenge. He's the Heartbreak Kid.
That's true.
I do think she's better off without him, though. I mean,
Do you think that they're still together though? Do you think Lenny and Kelly will stay together for any amount of time, or is he going to move on to her mom like he did in the short story?
She's in is she in college maybe? Like I think she's going to go
Kelly's
back to
in
school.
college.
He's not going to have the patience for Kelly to be in school. So I don't think that lasts very long.
Okay.
I would think they do, just because they're in Minnesota, her family's there. She has this very strong foundation.
Right.
Maybe this is it for him. Like it's possible that he's found something so other to himself.
Gotcha.
I don't know. Right. Who knows? I mean, he's a narcissist, right? But he's also like sort of a two-dimensional character. So it's hard to.
I think that's easier with I want to talk about what we all thought about the film. So on the podcast, for those who are new, we rate the film on a scale of 1 to 5 Jewish stars, taking into account things like cast and crew, Jewish content, like story, plot, and then also Jewish themes. And then also, thank you, Gil, we talk about whether or not this film is good for the Jews. Esther, do you want to kick it off?
It's a funny thing to rate the movie on because it's very, it's like a checklist. Okay. I mean, Jewish director, Jewish writer, Jewish original short story writer, Jewish music, Jewish actors playing the Jews. Of course. Do you guys talk a lot about Jew face on the pod?
Comes up almost every episode.
I was going to say we've alluded to it a bunch. If you want to even just break it down now, or you could just touch on it. But there's room to talk about it.
It's not so much relevant to this movie, and I think back then Jewish. No.
Right.
I was going to say Jewish characters were played by Jews. No, they actually weren't. But in this movie, they are. It's a very. This is a movie very, very, very much made by Jews. It's Jewish satire.
Right.
It's a Jewish story. It's seeing Jews as central to the story, and everyone else is other. It's about crossing over. It's about assimilation. It's about intermarriage. It's about betrayal. It's about overbearing Jewish families. It has these Jewish stereotypes. It's set in these Jewish places, from New York City to Miami Beach. So why would it be less than 5 stars? I'm trying to think where to take marks off. I mean, to me, that's 5 stars. That's a lot of Jewishness.
Okay.
That's a lot of Jew.
Coming in hot. Wow. Okay,
throwing
great.
it to you, Daniel.
Oh, okay. Wow. You're playing Kelly over here.
Do we not each rate it?
No, we do. We do. No, that's fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good.
We've just only given out very few 5 stars. So that's
it's a coveted rating.
But you also made the case for it. You don't have to sort of pick nits just because this doesn't feel like it should be the 5-star movie, if that's what it is.
Right.
I think there's grounds for that.
I think to echo a lot of what Esther had already set up, the cast and the crew, Elaine May, her daughter, Jeannie Berlin, Neil Simon,
Charles Grodin,
sure.
Bruce J. Friedman, Burt Bacharach.
It's all there, cast and crew wise. I think, obviously Cybill Shepherd and her dad are not Jewish, but I think that's sort of.
Oh, Sheldon Harnick, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof. He's like a Broadway composer.
Okay.
I think is in the credits for this. I think he composed some of the score.
Okay.
And I actually think Elaine May was married to him for a time. Maybe. Wow. Also, she married her own psychoanalyst later on, but then they stayed together for a very long time.
This is good hot goss. I love it. This is fantastic.
I love gossip from 40 years ago.
Yeah, I know. It's where'd you find that out? Page 6? No, Wikipedia.
Very much Wikipedia.
Yeah. In terms of the content, I think this is sort of where I think, for me, content-wise, it's just it's not a Jewish story. There are Jewish elements and Jewish themes of it, but it's just a love story sort of. And he loves one girl, he doesn't love one other girl. And the fact that she's Jewish, it's very much a part of the film, but I'm going to be, a little bit more picky. I think as Harry knows, I'm a little bit more literal in terms of if it takes place in the old country and it has rabbis and it's at a yeshiva, that's for Jewish story, that's a Jewish story for me. This is more of a love story. Thematically, I think is where it shines, right? So I think obviously you have the Jewish and not Jewish women in the movie and the identity of but he is not a very strong Jewish character himself. He's nebbish and like you said, a schmuck, and he's got brown hair, very skinny, not buff and big these blonde, superheroes that Kelly hangs out with. I think I'm going to come in at around 3.5 or 4 stars. Harry, what about yourself?
Well, before I jump in, was that 3.5 or was that 4 stars or 3.75? Because you didn't really resolve that.
No, I
would
didn't.
love to know.
Yeah. I think, I feel like I want to go like
just for the record.
For the
Don't
record.
say anything that you'll regret later, Daniel.
I don't want to get canceled for my rating. How about 3.75?
That's very pitchfork of you.
Yeah.
It's a good
That's
call
me.
out.
Harry, what about yourself? What do you think about this movie?
Yeah, I mean, the cast and crew you both pointed out is undeniable. There's a real Jewishness to this, and I mentioned this in the beginning that the sort of the one of the first plot summaries that I didn't read this one, but it identifies their characters as Jewish, and that's clearly a part of the movie. A lot of what you read about this in reviews, the way that its legacy has carried on is as this very Jewish film. I also think that thematically, like I love the read that you had, Esther, just talking about how this satirical story of these sort of, and giving that necessary context, I would say, about these sort of Jews, these Jews intermarrying out in this sort of time and kind of being drawn to this, this ideal
object of desire. Yeah.
This object of desire, this idea, exactly.
The term shiksa to me is not derogatory. It reflects worse. It reflects on him somewhat derogatorily.
No question.
The shiksa herself is blameless.
No, I definitely think this is. I think that's a huge part of this, because I think that this is about a cultural escape, him leaving his Jewishness and kind of looking for, this sort of objectified sense of otherness, whatever that means. And that's sort of that idea of non-Jewishness. I heard this comedic bit, the kind of notion of the idea of non-Jew implies that like the Jews would be the majority, which is like so far from the truth. The fact that they kind of see themselves, or that we see ourselves as sort of, it's Jews and non-Jews, but that really seems to be this point of attraction for him. He is looking for something more othered, and I think that's represented in the structure of the film itself. We talked about how he has that first sequence, that whole obviously honeymoon sequence where he's with Lila, and then at some point in like the halfway point of the film, he kind of says goodbye to her. He dumps her at that restaurant, and literally we don't see her for the rest of the movie. And I think what that does structurally, it takes the film. It's not just about him pursuing this Kelly character and pursuing her, ideals, but there's a real, I think there's momentum of sort of shedding his Jewishness. We get an entire half of the movie for him to push back against his Jewishness, to kind of be grossed out and roll his eyes at, all like I said, the sort of Jewish mannerisms of his wife, and kind of push himself aside from his first wedding. And basically the second half of the movie is him pulling himself into this new culture and embracing, what ends up being his future wedding, the very Christianized wedding, the very, he's just sort of embracing the land and this whole new gimmick. So because of that sort of structure thing, I just feel like this isn't just, the story of someone going on his honeymoon and then realizing he likes someone else. It really is, the movie takes pains to show the culture of the people that he's leaving and that he's going to, just to show that this really is about him shedding his faith. And I think that's, or shedding his culture, his Jewish culture. And I think that's so present, and that's sort of inextricably linked to what's going on in the movie. So in that way, I think it feels very Jewish. We said that there's a lot of content there. We said that, he has like the whole wedding, and there's a real Jewishness to this movie. Like I want to give it, let's call it 4.25.
Wow. Okay.
I think, yeah,
right.
I think, I do also, like you, Daniel, sort of reserve some of the higher rankings for movies that really,
What's
kind of dwell in the
like
Jewish.
I mean, we just did A Serious Man.
I was going to say A Serious Man. I think we gave a 5, and I think Yentl. I actually think you nailed that.
Sure,
but
called it.
I think but you know what? This reminds me of when we were discussing Clueless, which I would say is, a much less Jewish movie than this one is. But we had a guest on, and Rachel Rosenfeld, and she was explaining that, to her, that sometimes when a movie doesn't necessarily name its Jewishness, but the Jewishness still kind of like pervades it and still kind of is so clearly part of the movie, and just like the sensibility of it, like that is almost, more Jewish to a certain extent, because it's not trying to show you it's Jewish. It is Jewish. And this movie really has that. And, I hope I didn't lock in my last score, because I kind of just talked myself into a 4.5, and that's where I'll probably leave it, because, but I do think that this movie is just, in the comedy itself, we haven't even broken that down so much, but in just sort of the Elaine May sensibility of it all. Like,
sure.
There is such a Jewishness to this movie. You wouldn't have needed to tell me that this was made by an entirely Jewish cast and crew, because it's just there. It's part of the movie, and it really works its way, I think, into, it adds a meaningful and significant layer to, what otherwise is this sort of story of infidelity. Like, it really is about Jewish infidelity to a certain extent.
Oh my gosh, I do think it's so Jewish. I'm also now thinking, I'm sorry to be jumping around, but like the eating in the movie. So you have Lila and the eggs are which is such a good
I wrote
scene.
that down
I don't know.
as so
I don't know why
Jewish.
that scene isn't like totally iconic. I love it. Egg salad. Anything made from hard-boiled eggs to me is a food I'm honestly phobic of. Like it's
I'm
so
sorry to hear
revolting to
that.
me.
Deviled eggs are so good.
We joke about it so much at home. Like there's such a good like 30 Rock quote. Oh my God, what is it? When Liz Lemon and Jack Donaghy are having one of their conversations and Liz Lemon is like eating a hard-boiled egg or something. And she's like, I'm eating a hard-boiled egg. Do you know what that means? And he says that this conversation is disgusting. Anyway, now that scene. And then Kelly, do you remember when she at the bar, when she says, thanks for the nut? Like you actually really never see Kelly eat. And then also, you have Lila and the lobster. Like the lobster is this illicit other thing, right? It's very exciting and very foreign, but he's literally about to be like, well, screw that. Like, I want to go further than that. Like just just the positions that Lila is put in, like as a character in the movie. Because she's really kind of played to be the fool, but I do think that Jeannie Berlin like truly transcends it. She plays her so well. She's so earnest. She's so in love. She's just like a person.
Yeah, I think you're totally right about that. And I actually think that's a good segue into our follow-up question that we mentioned at the top. Is this good for the Jews? And I think that a lot of the answer to that question is based on how you view these characters. And I don't need to lead this one off, Esther, if you want to finish that thought about Lila and just say, how do you think this reflects? How do you think someone watching this will feel, about quote unquote the Jews kind of following this movie?
Well, the bad Jew in the movie is him. Like she's I feel bad for her. There's a lot of pathos in her character. Like it's like poor girl,
Totally.
Is it good for the Jews? I think about this a lot actually with TV writers, that I think about so many of the American Jewish stereotypes that are very negative are created by Jewish writers in television. Mm-hmm. And it gives people permission to kind of invest in those archetypes, or people who don't really know Jews to understand Jews in this way. Oh, you're neurotic because of Jerry Seinfeld, or things like that, or just the idea of the Jewish mother on film, or even like in literature, you think of like Portnoy's mother or things like that. Like it's almost like the broader American public is given permission to understand these archetypes because they're written by Jewish characters. To me, none of that is good for the Jews in some way. I mean, I'm so glad that these texts exist, and I love the imprint that Jewish people have had on American culture. It's totally singular. Like it's not like that in Australia, I love it. It's something that I love about America, but there's such a dark side to it. That permission that I think is implicitly given. And I wish there was a better term than a self-hating Jew, but you do have this generation of people that were desperate to get out of it, right? Like Lenny, for example. And, all these people in Hollywood, I mean, most of them, I mean, if you think about it, at some point, and married to a non-Jew, like it's like a cliche. And there is something self-loathing about it. Like, yeah, I don't know what to make of it, but I go back to that idea often when I see those characters on television, which is why, to me, where you see them more. So is it good for the Jews? I don't know. Maybe it's not relevant. Like I do think it's a Jewish story. And again, I like the Jewishness is named, right? You have a very Jewish wedding.
Sure.
But in terms of being used against him, like that's no one, these people seem very pure of heart or something like they're. Yeah.
But they also just seem very like mean spirited. Like the dad represents sort of the evils of the non-Jews and like what, no,
but he's like the gatekeeper. He's like the gatekeeper. But I don't think he's villainous or mean or anything. I think he's actually kind of being a good dad. He's like, who the hell are you? You're full of shit. Get away from my daughter.
Right. Yeah, that there's that take for sure. I mean, he represents sort of the ugly side. Like he's willing to get like pretty dirty in terms of like resort to violence and bribery to keep this Jew away from his like non-Jewish.
He doesn't negotiate with Kelly. Like that's where the negotiation is. It's between him and the dad.
Right.
It's interesting.
So you're locking in your answer as I'm not sure. Is that where we're settled?
Yes.
Okay. Harry, what about you? Good for the Jews?
Yeah, I mean, no, you made a very compelling argument just for the sort of permission that's sort of given. And that's something that we don't necessarily always interrogate in terms of this question, but it's obviously very relevant is, who is actually good for the Jews to who? Who is watching this and how are they watching it? And I think in the context of this film, I kind of obviously all of our lead characters are Jewish. And if you read sort of Lenny as this sort of Jewish stand-in, that's kind of an awful look. But, the reason I was prompted to ask you about it, following what you were talking, your defense of Lila was because I think I wish she got some resolution, and I wish we kind of came back to her and she got this sort of empowerment. But she is a very sympathetic character. Nothing she's doing is overtly antagonistic. I mean, she's really just being herself. Like, she's talking to him. She's asking him questions during sex because she just needs some reassurance. She's singing in the car because she enjoys singing. He gets upset at her for eating a chocolate bar. Like, she didn't deserve any of this. And I think, and I think I think we're supposed to be upset with, Lenny. And like I said, in the context of this read about him, forsaking his Jewishness and going and trying to take on this new culture, like, we're supposed to feel like, what is he doing? Why is he what is he leaving? What great he already has. And first of all, I just wanted to note, I mean, I think what you said about that gatekeeping is very astute, because I think that's, that his, Kelly's father represents the sort of last gate, that last before he can cross that threshold and kind of, like I said, forsake, abandon his Jewishness, which, not as relevant to the question of how Jewish is the film, but I wanted to note that I like the language you used. But I do think that I watched this movie very sympathetic to Lila's character, and you got, this very layered portrayal, I think, of the sort of Jewish, units at the beginning, the sort of Jewish wedding, and then the Jewish, how that Jewishness kind of prevails. And I don't think you would watch this coming out and thinking that there was something about, Lenny's Jewishness that I guess made him any more villainous, as if we want to call him, than he already was. So, I read it kind of like this was a really cool portrayal of, 1970s New York Jewishness. And it wasn't the most praiseworthy sort of portrayal. We've spoken about some movies that are really like glamorizing like the Jewish experience, and it's like, that's what I would want to show off to everyone. See, look, we can be, we talked about Inglourious Basterds, like, look, we could be tough too. And this definitely isn't that movie. But in terms of like spotlighting a moment in, Jewish cultural history and, 1970s New York, and just showing some pretty sympathetic characters, in addition to some of the other ones, I think it's pretty good for the Jews. I enjoyed this. This was like, Elaine May, great Jewish female director in the 70s, putting out an awesome Jewish movie. Like, I'd call this good for the Jews. That's kind of where I would weigh in on that. Daniel, how do you feel about that? Where would you weigh in?
I definitely, I think Esther sort of convinced me in terms of Lila's. I loved Lila from the beginning. I initially came in thinking she was someone that we should be pitying and things like that, but I almost think she offsets Lenny's sort of amorality and just sort of his moral bankruptcy, and just, his shittiness, his overall scumbagness, whatever.
He's quite devious, where she's sort of guileless.
Yeah. And she's able to kind of like balance it out almost, like, whereas he's so awful. And I think, her heart is in the right place. She's so sweet. She's so caring and considerate. And she's got these amazing outfits. She's a woman after my own heart. She loves egg salad. Like, you
love egg salad?
I love egg salad. It's a good.
I've never had egg salad once in my life.
Okay, we'll talk.
But I understand what it represents for people. We'll
send you a gift basket of egg salad. Hopefully it'll keep. But I think, like you said, Harry too. I think Elaine May being like a female director, identifiably Jewish and things like that. I think, that's like a strong thing. I'd come out almost like even, right? I think overall the takeaway is, and Kelly is, she doesn't really factor into this equation, but I think, between Lila and Lenny, I think, it's sort of like veering on not so great for the Jews, but then Lila kind of turns it around. So we're kind of almost even, like meh, I guess. The non-Jews also don't look that great in this film as well. So it's kind of like everyone kind of ends up looking, not so great. But yeah. So that was our review of The Heartbreak Kid. Esther Werdiger, thank you so much for being here this evening, staying up late for us. I really appreciate that. You too, Harry, on the East Coast.
My absolute pleasure.
Is there anything you'd like to plug at this time?
No.
Nothing. Not a single thing. You were in the 100 most Jewish foods in the world book. I saw your name.
Well, also those are like big staff projects. So, oh my gosh, that was so funny. That was such a fun project.
So plug it a little bit. Talk about that. That's so cool.
Every couple of years, there's a big kind of the staff get together and they do like 100 most Jewish books. They've done movies actually, but that was before my time, and I think maybe at some point they'll do it again. But the one I was involved in was 100 Most Jewish Foods, and the idea was that if you could make the case for it, right? Because some things it's like, well, that's not very Jewish. If you could make the case for it, and then you could write about it, like that would make the list. And I wrote a couple of them. I wrote one about tuna salad. Tuna, as Americans say, which is my egg salad, right? Yeah. Tuna is my egg salad. I would never say ride or die, but it's probably my ride or die. But yes, I wrote a little essay about it that is actually one of the easiest and possibly like best things I've actually written, actually. And it was about this idea of the tuna bagel. Do you know what a tuna bagel is? Tuna bagel.
What's a tuna bagel?
Right. So if you're come from a very Hasidic background and you're not so Hasidic anymore, but you still order a tuna bagel.
Okay. Love it.
It makes me laugh. So it's this idea that when you're kosher-ish, but you're you're at a diner or something, like that's the thing you can have. You can always have a tuna sandwich. But you should read it. It's very fun. Okay. So that's already from several years ago, but that's fun. We've worked on a few. We also made a big Jewish encyclopedia where I wrote a few entries. The one that's come to mind now is about Elaine May, who I loved writing about. That was really fun because, well, she's so Jewish, but she's playing a shiksa also. That's kind of such an interesting character.
But didn't they make them change the George and Elaine to be non-Jewish? Like they were originally written as Jewish, but then they said change them.
All the Seinfeld characters, they're right. They're so Jewish, but but officially those two are not. And you meet her dad at some point, and her dad is super waspy. But she's clearly so Jewish. Yeah. But that's such an interesting choice. But I just love her so much.
Nice.
I can talk about Seinfeld for a long time.
It's fair. Sorry. It's all good.
But that's all from me. This was really fun. And when I finally watch Fiddler on the Roof or Disobedience, we'll talk about it.
Sure thing. Harry, you got anything to plug? Nothing. Okay. Well, I just wanted to make sure that everyone checks out Jews on Film on Instagram and TikTok. And make sure to subscribe and like our podcast on iTunes.
Guys, I've never been on TikTok before.
Apparently we're on there. That's what Harry tells me. He's our youth correspondent over there on the TikToks. But thank you so much, Esther. Thank you, Harry. Have a good one, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Jews on Film is hosted and produced by Harry Ottensasser and Daniel Zana. Daniel and Harry edited this episode. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Jews on Film and subscribe to our podcast to get new episodes. Thanks for listening.